Many moons ago, when I was a high school English teacher, I taught my classes about the Wizard of Oz. Now, as a Kansan, I pride myself on my knowledge of and connection to the Wizard of Oz, and after many years of living in Florida, I can tell you that the Wizard of Oz is apparently the only thing that we Kansans are known for, which is a pity. There are many great literary, political, and life lessons to be gleaned from that famous children's novel written by L. Frank Baum in 1900, but there are also many important lessons that can be taken from the famous 1939 Hollywood cinematic adaptation as well. So near the end of my first year as a high school English teacher, I decided to show my students the movie, The Wizard of Oz. Before I did, I introduced to them some of the more interesting facts related to the movie. One such fact that really captured their attention was something I referred to as the curse of the Tin Man. I informed my students that there is a belief among some that in the filming of The Wizard of Oz, there was actually a curse on the character of the Tin Man. The curse started when the original actor cast to play the Tin Man, some of you may know it was Buddy Ebsen, who went on to play Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies, when he was hospitalized with a serious lung condition within the first 10 days of shooting the movie. It seems his lungs became coated by the aluminum powder that the makeup department used on his face when he was in costume. So Ebsen's hospitalization left the studio scrambling to find another Tin Man. The studio quickly opened auditions again and ended up giving the job to Jack Haley, the actor that we all now associate with the 1939 Tin Man. But one of the other actors who auditioned became furious and heartbroken when he learned that he had not won the role. And so he plotted out a rather morbid revenge against the studio. During filming, the rejected actor sneaked onto the set. He put on his own Tin Man costume and hid in the background of one of the scenes. There he hanged himself while the cameras were rolling. The body was not found until much later in the day, so no one realized that the dead body was accidentally filmed and actually made it into the final cut of the movie, where it appears in the background of a scene in which Dorothy and her friends are happily skipping down the yellow brick road. When I told my students about this, they were shocked, as some of you are, and very, very eager now to watch the movie again to see this scene and see the hanging dead body with their own eyes. So we watched the movie. When the scene in question came up, I pointed on the screen to a silver blur in the background and said, "That's the actor." The students all watched in shock and horror. They all saw the hanging Tin Man. They couldn't believe that after years of watching this movie, they had never seen this before. They demanded that I rewind the tape and let them watch it again and again because they couldn't or didn't want to believe their own eyes. Well, I obliged them, playing it back several times. The students were all left shaking their heads. I let them talk about this for about 5 minutes, and then I gathered their attention again. I took a quick poll to see how many of them saw the hanging Tin Man. All of them raised their hands. And that's when I told them there was no hanging Tin Man. Confusion. So I went on. I told them all, "I'm afraid I need to ask all of you for your forgiveness because I lied to you. It was for a good reason, though, because it was the best way I could teach you one of the most important lessons you can ever know. The story about the disgruntled actor who hanged himself was a lie. That never happened. What you just saw in the background of that scene was not a man in a tin suit hanging himself. It was an emu." The students reacted with some colorful expletives. I chose not to punish them considering the circumstances. Most of them absolutely refused to believe what I had just told them. They knew what they saw, a man in a silver suit hanging himself. So I rewound the tape, and I showed them the scene again. This time, I pointed out the wings of the emu. I pointed out his beak. I even showed them the scene just a few seconds before the supposed hanging, where the emu was actually walking around in the foreground. The students were stunned. They all now clearly saw the emu, just as clearly as they had seen the hanged man a few minutes before. So I told them, here is the lesson you are to learn from this. What you all just experienced was a psychological phenomenon known as priming. If you prime a person's mind by dropping some hint or implanting some kind of expectation, and then you show that person some kind of ambiguous stimuli, say an ink blot, then that person is apt to see in the ambiguous stimuli whatever they were primed to see. In other words, you will always tend to see what you expect to see. You will always tend to hear what you expect to hear. Your mind will find a way to make sure you find whatever it is you're looking for. This is the hidden danger of bias. And we all have biases, and all of our inborn biases will color the way that we see the world, from text to movies to people, until the day that we each die. So the lesson is, be aware of your biases, your expectations, and know that every conclusion you draw in life will absolutely be influenced by them. It's a powerful lesson. And I learned it the same way that my students had. I myself was once a victim of the Wizard of Oz trick or hoax. It's a moment that I'll never forget. I have always considered myself a rational and objective individual, but after I heard the story of the hanging Tin Man, when I watched the video clip over and over, I would have sworn to you, I would have wagered literally my life's fortunes that I saw a Tin Man hanging from a tree. I was certain. When I discovered it was a hoax and I went back to the film, I was absolutely shocked to see, clear as day, a giant bird. But that is the power of expectations. Our world is full of ambiguous stimuli like that emu. And this means that our expectations will constantly be influencing the way that we perceive reality. But the power of expectation goes far beyond mere perception. Expectations can actually alter reality itself. Most of us here are probably already aware of the phenomenon known as the placebo effect. A placebo is a fake treatment, perhaps in the form of saline or a sugar pill, that sometimes improves a patient's condition simply because the patient has an expectation that it will work. The placebo effect is so common, so prevalent, that every scientific study of a new medicine or treatment must control for its impact, or the experiment will be considered invalid. The scary thing is, this power of expectation can also be used for harmful purposes as well. In 1961, researcher Walter P. Kennedy coined the term nocebo to refer to a stimulus that created and fulfilled an expectation of pain or harm. One famous example of a cultural nocebo can be found among peoples that still practice voodoo. Among one voodoo tribe, there was a belief that if the shaman pointed a bone at you, you would die or go into a coma. Anthropologists have actually witnessed and recorded this phenomenon, which they have dubbed voodoo death. Placebos and nocebos are physical, scientific examples of the power of expectations. Expectations have the power to harm and heal, to create and destroy. Recognizing the incredible and undeniable power of expectations, I believe that our faith compels us to embrace hope as a cardinal virtue of Unitarian Universalism. Hope at its core is an expectation that good can happen and will happen if we are willing to work for it. UU theologian James Luther Adams argued passionately, the resources, both human and divine, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. That is hope. Unitarian Universalists are and must ever remain a people of hope, because hope and its power is the foundation needed to change the future. It's easy to give in to despair. The times we are living in are dark. The newspaper daily bears witness to this darkness, and sometimes it feels like every step forward we take another 2 steps back. As a nation, we have recently moved significantly closer to achieving true marriage equality for gay and lesbian couples. But that achievement has been countered by a massive, and in my opinion, as a proud American, an embarrassing homophobic backlash. A knee-jerk reaction of hate mingled with fear. If you've paid attention to the news, you know this. The Human Rights Campaign this week noted that more than 100 anti-LGBT bills have been filed this year in 29 different state legislatures. It wasn't too long ago that commentators, both liberals and conservatives, were beginning to float the idea that after decades of struggle and decades of victories for the civil rights movement, we had finally become a post-racial America. As if in direct response to that hubris, as a nation, we now find ourselves in the middle of an epidemic of race-related police and prosecutorial misconduct, from Ferguson, Missouri, to Staten Island, New York, from Cleveland, Ohio, to now North Charleston, South Carolina, where just last week a fleeing, unarmed black man was videotaped being shot 8 times in the back by a white police officer after a routine traffic stop. In the face of such disappointments as these, in the face of these tragic obstacles, it is easy to lose hope. Easy to throw our hands up and believe that true justice is a lost cause. But we cannot allow ourselves to fall to that despair. The power and danger of despair is pernicious. It sneaks up on you and affects you in ways that you can't even imagine sometimes. An example. In the 1960s, psychologists performed an experiment. They put some dogs in a box, one in which the dogs could not escape. And the scientists proceeded to electronically shock the dogs. Initially, as you would imagine, the dogs frantically tried to escape, but to no avail. Faced with failure over and over again, eventually the dogs gave up trying to escape. They just sat there and accepted the shocks. Later, the same dogs were put into a much smaller box, one that they could easily jump out of to escape. They were shocked again. Instead of immediately jumping out of the small box, they laid down again and accepted the shocks again, because based on their previous failures, they expected to fail again. This phenomenon is called learned helplessness. And it is another example of the power of expectations. If you try and fail so many times that you begin to expect failure, then you'll stop trying altogether, even when success is at your fingertips. You will never achieve success because you literally can't see. You can't even imagine the victory because you've lost the vision. I ask all of you this morning, have you lost the vision? Have you lowered your expectations of what yet could be? Has the world, with all its bitter disappointments, stolen your prophetic imagination? I've used this quote in here before. I'm going to use it again because I love it, and it rings true for me. It's from one of my favorite American philosophers, Rocky Balboa. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It will beat you to your knees if you let it. You, me, nobody is gonna hit as hard as life, but it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. As a high school English teacher in an underfunded, downtrodden, inner-city school, I often saw firsthand the effects of learned helplessness in my own students. They each had met with hardship and failure so often, they didn't even want to try anymore. I needed a way to encourage them, so I told them this story. Once upon a time, a frog fell into a tall pot of boiling milk. The frog tried to jump out, but the walls of the pot were too tall. But the frog refused to give up, even though escape was physically impossible. He kept hopping and swimming and churning his hind legs. Eventually, all this movement churned the boiling milk into a small chunk of butter that the frog was able to hop upon and use as a springboard to jump out of the pot. Now, unlike the experiment of boxed dogs, I'm pretty sure this story of a potted frog is apocryphal. But I believe it bears witness to an important truth that transcends its lack of historicity. It's the same truth that Thomas mentioned in that Henry David Thoreau quote at the end of Walden: "If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours." I believe our faith, I believe our commitment to the doctrine of love demands an attitude of ultimate hope. I echo the sentiments of the Apostle Paul. Love hopes all things. All things, even seemingly impossible things. Love hopes for a nation where a gay man or woman can live an entire lifetime, cradle to grave, without ever experiencing any form of discrimination. Love has an expectation that we will one day live in a country where an African American child can grow up and live cradle to grave without ever having to give a second thought to what might happen if he were to ever be pulled over by a white police officer for a routine traffic stop. Love demands a community where soup kitchens and homeless shelters are closed down because we have eradicated poverty. A community where all those prisons we built in the 1980s and 1990s are being shut down because the cells are all empty. I know these dreams won't happen without work, but the work will never happen if we don't have the dream. We can't achieve great things if we stop believing that great things are possible. I sometimes fear as a nation we have lost the ability to imagine great things anymore. We've all become realists, cynics, electrocuted dogs in a cage. As my faith grows, I'm beginning to believe that one of the core tenets of being a UU is refusing to allow yourself to become a cynic, refusing to surrender to despair. It means holding on to great expectations. It means seeing and reaching for the possible beyond the actual. It means choosing to find a way, no matter what, to find a way to harvest beauty from fields fallowed by despair, pain, and failure. It means never ceasing to churn butter in a pot of boiling milk. As our worship draws to a close this morning, I'd like to share these words from children's author, and in my opinion, prophet, Shel Silverstein. And I encourage you to take these words to heart and let them guide your path today and for all your days to come. Listen to the mustn'ts. Listen to the don'ts, child. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, but then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. Amen, and blessed be.